Yep.
Okay, so we're going to start off going through the appendicular skeleton now, and we're going to begin with the upper portions of the appendicular skeleton, the pelvic girdle, the arm, and the hand. And first of all, I have here a little clavicle. The clavicle has a few parts to it. The one end, you'll note, is rather blunt and flattened, like someone smashed it down, and that's